Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go. My guest today is this guy, Derek Brown. He is author of Mindful Mixology, a comprehensive guide to no and low alcohol cocktails. I've got mine here. He's the founder of Positive Damage Incorporated and a former owner of the Columbia Room in Washington, D.C. So hello, Derek.
Hey, Tracy, how are you?
I am good. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. Thanks.
So we got introduced from our mutual friend, Abby Ferguson, and who I've known from Atlanta Food and Wine Festival a long time ago, and whose CEO will be on the show next week. Co-founder will be on the show next week.
Lauren.
And yeah, Lauren. Yep.
She's
talking
awesome.
About Spiritless. She is awesome. But Abby's like, you need to meet Derek Brown and you need to read this book. So I have this book, and as you can see, I've been reading it and have lots of chats on here. So I want to get talking to you about the book and what brought you here. Do you want to say that John Chen is in the house? Happy New Year to you too. And yes, it is a hot new trend, which let's talk about the word trend. It's not going to go away, Derek, right?
No, it's not going to go away. And in fact, I mean, one of the funny things is, and we can get more into this, I don't have to go into detail right off the bat, but it's also not a trend. It's been around for a very long time. It's one of the largest social movements in the United States, but we'll talk about that later.
Well, yeah. And I think you mentioned a lot of that in the book too, because of where you found cocktail, recipes and things. So how did you get into, you're a bartender. How did you get into the low and no alcoholic beverage cocktail space? No ABV.
Right. Well, there's a couple different paths that I had to entry. But one of the interesting things is that for the longest time, I still have a company called Drink Company that used to manage some of the bars that I owned, such as the Columbia Room, and we had a pop-up bar and so forth. And my partner at the time, Angie Featherston, didn't drink. And when I first met her, she actually came up to my bar when I was a bartender, and she said, I would like a drink that doesn't have alcohol. And it wasn't because she had a problem. It wasn't for any religious reason. She just didn't really like the taste of alcohol. And so she asked me for a complex, interesting drink that didn't have alcohol in it. So I actually was able to reach in my sort of bag of tricks and found a recipe from Jerry Thomas, who is, kind of credited as one of the early bartenders in the United States, celebrity bartenders. And he wrote the first bartender's guide called A Bon Vivant's Guide, or How to Mix Drinks. And so I took a drink from that called the Orgeat, which is delicious. Orgeat is like an almond syrup with fresh lemon juice and powdered sugar. I used mint, crushed ice, and it's a great drink. That's how we became friends. And then we became partners after that. So early on, I kind of understood the need for great no and low alcohol drinks. But the truth is that I didn't know how much we needed them at the time, right? So they're still kind of tucked away. You'd have to ask. And that having to ask can be something that's like a kind of embarrassing moment for people, and it can feel like they're either left out or they have to admit to everybody, their whole life story by saying, I don't drink. And so, over time, I started to realize the necessity of putting this up front, right? Instead of this just being kind of at first the thing I had tucked away, it moved to the thing that, we put at the bottom of the menu, right? The non-alcoholic drinks, there's the kiddie drinks, lemonade, soda.
Yeah.
And one or two non-alcoholic drinks. And now, the Columbia Room, I closed it earlier this year, but by the end of it, we had those integrated into the menu in a way that people could feel fully adult ordering them. You know what I mean? They could feel like a real human being instead of feeling like they had to go down to the very bottom and be like, does this have alcohol? Does that not alcohol?
Right.
have alcohol. So I guess for me, it was early on, but also I started to reappraise my relationship with alcohol over time. And so, in 2019, I stopped drinking, and, I don't identify as an alcoholic, and that's not necessarily what I'm going to do forever. But right now I don't drink. And so this all is a selfish ploy. I want more non-alcoholic choices out there in the world. So
well, I love your selfish ploy because it's selfish for me too. Because I am, as I said in the introduction or the post for this, is like I stopped drinking in 2019 as well. And I want something different to drink. And like your partner, I'm like, I want it to be sophisticated. And people ask, what do you like? I'm like, I like ginger. I want low sugar. I want, just a good flavor. I don't mind a club soda with a lime. Don't get me wrong. But I do want, as you call it in the book, sophistication to a beverage. And I stopped drinking soda in 1995.
Yeah. So I don't know what's worse, alcohol or soda, probably alcohol, but ultimately they both are not great things. But it's interesting because the way my life partner, Maria Bausa, she's also a partner in my business now too, and is a wonderful advocate for these things. She says that when she goes and sits down for a dinner, the glass of wine is what makes her feel like an adult in a way, and I think that's true for a lot of us, right? So I don't look down on that at all, and I get it. But for some of us who aren't drinking and still want that experience, we want something complex and interesting, because it really still is exciting to drink something that it, has all of those, complex flavors and bitterness and sweetness and sourness. It kind of lights up our brain and it's exciting. So I think that, whether or not it has alcohol in it, it really can foster this kind of excitement and positive emotions in us. And so I get it. And I want to provide that for people.
Yeah, I agree, because it's like, and my friend Joan Eisenstadt and your fellow DC person here posted in here, in the meetings industry, there have been Friends of Bill events for many years, which is a non-drinking, are encouraging non-alcohol at event. I mean, and follow-up question is, why is the meetings industry still pushing alcohol as a way to have fun and be open to conversations? And I think I think it's the last one in here that I found today. I love the fact in the book that you have the green pages that are written by other people. And I don't remember where it was, but it was just the complexity of the drink makes it an adult beverage, right? And I love that. And it doesn't, I always talk about the Dixie sized cup of water that you get, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in all of it, like, there's so many things that make a cocktail, right? Obviously, they're non-alcoholic beverages too, but for a cocktail, it's in a beautiful glass. It has a really beautiful garnish on it. It has all of these different aspects. It's an intensity of flavor. There's this piquancy or bite that you get. And so, in that book, I tried to talk about how you could create cocktails. And in some cases, you can make it out of household ingredients, right? I mean, so for instance, there's a drink in here called the pinch hitter that is lemonade, right? So the joke is, all we got was lemonade and soda, and here I am now pushing a lemonade drink. But in all fairness, it's a very good one, and it's a complex one. And here's what I did: I took, lemon juice, and I took ginger syrup instead of syrup. All right, so I added ginger to it, so it has a little more bite and intensity to it. I added salt, right, which adds a little bit of texture and cuts down some of the bitterness. I added apple cider vinegar, which is a spoonful of it, which is a byproduct of alcohol, right? But doesn't have any alcohol in it, and adds a lot of that funky esters that you can get from alcohol sometimes. And then aquafaba, right? Which I know that we're going to talk about. We can talk about it now or whatever.
We can talk about it now. Aquafaba. Everybody, it's the liquid from a chickpea can.
That's right.
So save that liquid.
Yeah. It's a 99-cent ingredient for a lot of it, right? So, and so this whole drink, the pinch hitter, you can kind of build around, and you have all these ingredients. They're all household or grocery store, ingredients, and it creates a sophisticated, interesting drink, But not only that, there's such an array of non-alcoholic spirits, wines, and beers out there. We mentioned Abby, and we mentioned, or I guess Lauren, who's going to be on next week from Spiritless. They have Kentucky 74. I used to work for them all, so I'll give that caveat. But I still love their product even after I don't work for them. So it's a good one. It's like a bourbon alternative. So there's lots of options out there. And so there's so many options, but they're still finding their audience in the sense that, one of your guests had mentioned about why don't they have this at meetings? And I think that's our question. That's the premise of this, right? Why don't they have it? And they should, because people want it. 23% of the population don't drink, right? We're talking about adults. But 80% of the people who buy these products also drink alcohol. So you have a wide group of people, both don't drink and drink, who are interested in these products.
Well, and then just to take it, that 23%, I think it's 30% don't drink or stop after the first drink. So that combines those two. So it's a huge opportunity and to add more revenue to your bottom line in making sure that, and actually I met a woman last week in Minneapolis. I kept saying Wisconsin, in Minneapolis, and she started Zero Proof Collaborative. And she said she went to actually the hair salon owner opened up a non-alcoholic store next to her salon.
Very cool.
And it was packed when it opened. It was like 16 people in the store, and it was not a big store. But she's like, I went to her grand opening and I stayed for 3 hours instead of leaving after an hour. And so think about how much more money you can make on your cash bar, by adding those non-alcoholic beverages.
Yeah. Well, going back to this idea, it's a trend, right? I mean, it is. I do recognize that there is an explosion of, non-alcoholic spirits, beers, wine, cocktails, et cetera. And there's more interest than ever in the media. But, in the sense that there's always been people who are interested in it, not just in the historical perspective, but the people who are just coming, as you mentioned, who come to the bar or meeting and they just have a soda and lime and then they leave, or they feel kind of left out overall. And that's not the feeling that we want to engender in people in hospitality. It's the exact opposite of what we want to do.
Exactly. All right. I want to give a shout out to Alex here. Wrote in, super excited. Love the book, especially the Oregot lemon recipe. It demonstrates that non-alcohol doesn't have to be boring. I love that. And an index would be nice. Here's what I have, what I can make. Yes. That's very cool. Yeah. And then Lynn Wellish wrote in, and she actually commented before we went live too, would be lost without Nectar of the Gods Diet Coke. You need to let that go. You need to let that go, Len. Caffeine after 5 is way too much. Yes, for anybody it is. But it really does add. And one of the reasons I wrote this thing is I didn't want the calories. I didn't want the after effects of alcohol, but I didn't want to spend the money. And I think one of the things that you pointed out in the book that I think is really important is that if we do want the sophistication in a drink, it does take time to create these recipes. It's not just like a soda and a lime, right? So if I do want this drink, I have to be willing to pay for it as well, because it's a design, it's a recipe.
Yeah, I wrote an article for Wine Enthusiast about a year or two ago. I don't remember exactly, but it was arguing why you should pay as much for non-alcoholic cocktails as cocktails with alcohol. And the bottom line is that, we're putting the same level of ingredients. Obviously, if it's like a very cheap ingredients and it's poorly made, then I get it. Don't charge more for that. But if you're taking who has studied this craft to really make excellent cocktails, and they are seeking these ingredients that are exotic and interesting and expensive, then they should cost the same amount of money. I'll give you one example from the Columbia Room. I had a cocktail that had ants in it, right? So I was inspired by Rene Redzepi, who has Noma and is a world famous chef. He had used black ants in one of his recipes because it tastes like vinegar or lemon, actually. Okay. I would never think that, but I tried them and it's true. So where do you source black ants from? You can't go to your garden or that crack in your house that always seems the ants pour through, and catch them in the little raid trap. You have to go to a place that has organic ant, and that was not cheap. These ants were as expensive as truffles or gold, by the ounce. So I think that ultimately, if you're looking for quality oriented ingredients, most people are not looking for ants, I'll be honest with you. But if you're looking for quality ingredients, this is just one example. If you're looking for something interesting, complex, forget about it. It's just as expensive in most cases.
Well, exactly. And I think we have to, and I like the fact that you you said that it's a craft, because it is a craft, because you've been studying this for a long time, and it is a skill set that we relish. But and then I'm going to take that into a different angle too. Is like, you and I had this conversation before we got on a couple of weeks ago, is like, so you're a bartender, you owned a bar, several bars, but as Joan mentioned, meetings and events, when we're in a hotel ballroom, we don't have you.
Yeah.
Right. We have a hotel banquet server.
Right.
How do we incorporate this and this level of complexity, and even serving spiritless, serving non-alcoholic beverages that are already canned in the meetings industry, in that, because it's not the same as even the hotel front bar.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there are a number of ready-to-drink or RTD cocktails that are available. Spiritless makes some excellent ones. Mocktail Club is one that is also just amazing. Their Capri Spritz is one of my favorites. Overall, you can make fairly simple, easy drinks, and that's because there's all these great products now, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say that you wanted to have a bar and you have your banquet server who the most they can do is highballs, right? Like, they're not going to be able to make a drink with ants in it, and bless them, they don't want to either, and the guest might not want it either in that setting, right?
Right.
So I get it. So making a gin and tonic though is easier than ever, right? Like, you can get Monday zero alcohol gin, or Liars makes a non-alcoholic gin, and add some high quality tonic to it and a lime, and it's just as good as any gin and tonic, really. So it's easier than ever to do it. Or you could, get one of the many non-alcoholic beers or wines. I mean, if people have tried Athletic, they'll try and go, what am I missing? Nothing in terms of the flavor. Obviously, I'm missing maybe that, psychoactive effect of alcohol, and I get that, but I don't want that right now. That's not what I'm after, Right. And so it takes all the flavors there. Is wonderful. There's also all these non-alcoholic wines, and really top level producers like Weingut Leitz or Gießen from New Zealand are making de-alcoholized wines. So the quality is just leapt from here to here. If you all remember, for those of you who do remember trying O'Doul's or like some of the other non-alcoholic wines, which I won't name, which were not great. Forget about those. Those are, they are what they are, but there's a new level of quality that's out there, and it's only getting better.
That's awesome. That is really, really good to know, and good for, me as a person who wants to bring something to another party, right? At home or at an event. But I actually just had this idea. I'm like, every event that I host, if I'm working for my client, I'm going to make sure that the hotel that I'm working with has a copy of this book, and saying we need to have some of these recipes on the bar, right? Yeah. And because it's just as important.
Right. And there's low, right? I mean,
right.
So I think that, sometimes, and Dry January is part of the, people kind of like blend together the sobriety, what this book is for, and really what I'm aiming for is towards people who are looking to reduce or eliminate their drinking because it's, a habit or a peer pressure or stress, but not necessarily because they're in recovery. I think that's a different level, which requires a different level of attention and care. For me, and some of those people may be okay drinking non-alcoholic products, but ultimately this is for everybody, right? Anybody who wants to, for whatever reason, reduce their drinking or eliminate their drinking.
Well, in that store that I went to in Minneapolis the other day, there were two people behind me, and I just talked to strangers and asked questions. And I'm like, okay, so why are you all here? We're wondering if this movement or this store is for people who are sober. And one of the guys, he's like, here's my coin. And he's like, I've been sober for 3 years. And he walked out with 6 bottles of different things. But he did say, he's like, I'm not going to buy the spiritless because it tastes so much like this, right? Or whatever one it is. I mean, because they're canned, and we don't need to talk about spiritless all the time, but their canned old fashioned tastes like tastes like an old fashioned, right? So he's not going to buy that one, but he's going to buy some other things. So I thought that was really interesting. But all right, so one question that I want to have, and we've kind of circled around it, but what does mindful mean when you're saying mindful mixology?
I think for a lot of So mindful has taken on this like sort of like this large category of being kind of like contemplative and aware of the moment and what you're doing. And I like that definition. I myself practice mindfulness and meditate and all of that because I think is an important part of clearing our mind and being present. But really what I think mindful means in this context is like mind the gap in the subway in England, right? Just be aware of what you're doing. So those definitions kind of cross over at some point, but I mean it in a lot looser way. Really, it's mindful drinking itself is being aware of what you're drinking, right? It's not prescriptive of what you should or shouldn't drink. It just means, why do you drink? And if you know that why, then you're going to set the what and how, right? So I think that mindful in that case is really just an awareness of what you're drinking and why. And I think everybody should go through that process.
Right.
And that the result of that, the end of that is not, I'll never drink again. For some people it will be, for some people it won't be. I think it's, I know why I'm drinking. I know what I intend to drink. This is incredibly important in business settings, right? And in meetings and events too, right? Because I've seen a lot of people, especially, I used to teach these like etiquette classes to law offices, right? To their summer associates, because they come right out of college and they get hammered in front of one of the partners. And that would be the, kind of like keep them down for a little while in the eye of the partner. So I think, it's in business and meetings, you have to be aware of how you're being perceived. And so I think drinking too much, and if you're not paying attention, you don't even know how much alcohol is in something. Drink a couple Manhattans and all of a sudden you're, whoa, that's not who you want to portray yourself as necessarily.
Right, exactly. All right, I want to take a quick second to say, hey, we're going to give away a free copy of the book signed by Derek, but how did we decide that we were going to do this? We're going to give it to a person who's tagged. Is that right? Mm-hmm. So
in whatever medium you think it, LinkedIn.
Yeah. So tag whatever medium you're on, because I don't know, Joan, if you're on Facebook, Lynn's on LinkedIn, John's on LinkedIn, Alex is on LinkedIn. So tag somebody that you think needs to hear this conversation for whatever reason, because they have a restaurant or bar or whatever, bartender, and we'll pick a name from the people who are tagged to win a book. But so I want to jump back to another story I heard when I was in Minneapolis, was all about non-alcoholic drinks and eating at Wanami as well. But it was this one guy, they were describing this man who everybody thought was an alcoholic. But what he did is he had one or two drinks and then he would act like he was drunk, and everybody, just so that he could somewhat feel like he fit in. And everybody really thought at one point that he was an alcoholic and they needed to have a conversation with him. He's like, no, I'm only having one. And then I'm having, then I'm just having soda and water. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
All right, Joan, go ahead and just tag someone in the group, in the Eating at a Meeting Facebook group. You can only tag people in the group, but if you go onto the link, if you go into Thrive Meetings and Events, you can tag somebody there. Anyways, okay. How do you, one of the other thing, I keep picking the book up because I just hit my head in with it, but I liked how you talked about the different kinds of ingredients that you can use. Yeah. Right. And then the different types of drinks as well. And that was actually in the one of the last chapters of like pulling it all together. Can you talk about different kinds of ingredients and then different types of drinks that we're still looking to create, even if it's non-alcoholic?
Yeah. The interesting thing is that going back to that Jerry Thomas guide, in that book, the first bartender's guide, there was 10 cocktails in the original one. Right. Okay. And there was a number of temperance drinks, temperance being the word for non-alcoholic back then, right? So in the 19th century, in 1862, this book was published. It had almost as many temperance drinks as it did cocktails. But there are a number of other drinks too, right? Like sours and highballs and punches and that sort of thing. And so this word cocktail has become, inclusive of anything that has alcohol, or in this case, also non-alcoholic. But there's lots of different types of cocktails. Or now I guess have become subcategories of it. So sour drinks, highballs, all of those are kind of important. And if you're throwing an event or you're at have a hospitality space, you have to kind of have that different range of drinks. Some people, they want a sour, which an example would be a margarita or a daiquiri or something like that, a whiskey sour. People who want like a highball, which is a very simple combination of a spirit and soda. And then there's, and so on and so forth. Sometimes people want just like an old-fashioned style drink, which is the very original definition of a cocktail in print. It was from 1806. We won't go into detail on that, but it's Spirit, Sugar, Water, Bitters, right? Which is actually my first book, what I wrote, called Spirit, Sugar, Water, Bitters. Also a great book. But I think that became kind of harder to make for a while with non-alcoholic spirits. But now you can. And so, there are a number of, products out there that can go well into that. So I guess ultimately having a range of interesting drinks is important. And it depends on the setting, and then using a range of ingredients, some of which might be expensive, some of which might be a little less expensive, and it all evens out in the long run. So I describe in my book a variety of ingredients you can use, from, like I said, like vinegar to non-alcoholic creative spirits. Like they have spirits out there too that are non-alcoholic that have never existed before, right? So there are analog ones like bourbon, analog, right? Like Kentucky 74, or, Monday, not zero alcohol gin. And then you have ones like Caleño, right? Calen with the accent over at O, that's made with like pineapple and ginger. And it's kind of rummish, but it's also unique to itself. It goes awesome in a pina colada, but it's also pretty good sipping on its own with some soda water or something like that. So there's like a lot of different things out there. I think right now, if it's interesting. So I wrote this book in 2020. 2021. So what was happening then, right? But it was at the beginning of the non-alcoholic kind of boom, right? And Camper English, who's a really great writer, who has a blog called Alcademics, and you might know him because he's
been on the show before.
Oh, he's an amazing character. Safe.org, which is really great. But he started listing all of the spirits, non-alcoholic spirits that existed. And when I started following it was around 30 something, right? And then by the time this book was in existence, it was like, I don't know, 80 or 90. I forget how many I said. Now it's over 160, I think. So it's grown so much. And what's interesting about that is that, it's still like a tiny drop in the bucket compared to flavored vodka, but it's a lot of different choices. And I think that's really good for us. And that's good for the consumers, from simple drinks to complex ones. There's just a lot out there, Tom.
Well, and there was one in here recipe. I think it had egg in it or something, right? And that's what I had Camper talking on a couple of years ago about allergens, and I should have him come back on, especially talking about this non-alcoholic side of this, right? The cocktail side. But I'll give everybody that link too. But yeah, he's in it. He's so smart, and he just came out with a new book too. Now, okay, there's a lot of terms out there. There's mocktail, there's non-alcoholic, there's low proof, zero proof, or whatever. What do we use? How do we best describe it without making somebody feel like they're ordering a Shirley Temple?
In the past, I used to be pretty inclusive and say, oh, well, whatever. I didn't like the word mocktail too much because I think it sounds like it's deriding somebody. But I think now it's only one phrase that works. It's non-alcoholic cocktail, right? I think I appreciate all the other ones. There's some cutesy ones. There's some my partner, Maria, she had a beverage program and she called them immaculate concoctions. You know what I mean? So I think there's lots of fun ways to put it. And if that serves your program, I get it. But if you're making something that is meant to resemble an adult sophisticated drink, a cocktail, then it should be called a non-alcoholic cocktail. Is what I would argue now. And there is historical precedent too, because I mentioned the first time that the cocktail was mentioned or defined in print was in 1806, right? It's called Spirit, Sugar, Water, Bitters, which spirits is a key part of it. The first time it's mentioned is in 1798 in England in a paper called the Morning Gazetteer. And it does mention ginger, but it does not mention alcohol. And in fact, David Wondrich, a really great historian and writer, has suggested it may not have contained alcohol. So the word is ours. It belongs to non-alcoholic and alcohol alike. So I think it's, and anyway, we've gotten to a point where we kind of understand oat milk is not actually milk. Right. And sorry if I'm telling you this and you're like, oh my God, really? Shocking. Right. Or the veggie burgers are not made of cows. So it's easy enough to say non-alcoholic cocktails. And it really makes people feel normal, I think, because they're like a non-alcoholic cocktail. I don't have to like use the cutesy name or dance around it or be like, is this zero something, and what does this phrase mean? Mocktail, I think it's kind of like became the part of the vernacular, and probably worldwide it's the most recognized. So I do understand why people use it, but I would like it to kind of fade away eventually, because I think that it can feel like you're mocking somebody, or even if it's just tied or associated to the sugary drinks of the past, you know what I mean? Because there was a time where you could order a mocktail and you'd get something that was just all of the juices at the bar combined.
Well, yeah, and I tagged on Instagram one of my favorite restaurant in New Bern, North Carolina, because they have they actually think they have it listed as non-alcoholic beverages on their menu. And then I went down the street and I'm like, hey, do you have a mocktail? And they're like, do you want Ocean Spray cranberry juice or do you want Tropicana orange juice? And I'm like, I'll just have a club soda with a lime,
Right. Yeah. Good call.
No, thank you. Right. And I'm like, okay, so actually maybe I should just go buy them a book too, because like, let's up this thing. Right. And again, I mean, and I don't know, do you have any statistics on how much, I mean, I know you've talked about how many more spirits are in here, but upping it to help your revenue. Does it? Oh,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's very clear that it'll add to your revenue. I mean, I don't have any specific statistics that I think would be relevant here. Obviously, it depends on the place, and each place can kind of define for themselves. But I do know this. If you don't have non-alcoholic drinks, you're simply missing out. People are just not ordering. Right. Or they're ordering something, as we already mentioned, soda and lime. And then you're missing that second drink or third drink,
Right.
And there are people who are putting non-alcoholic drinks on the menu, and then they're still hiding at the bottom or putting it in a way that's not accessible or kind of embarrassing to order. That's the next level, right? Like that means that people see it, they know you have it, but in that circumstance, they might feel awkward ordering. Right. Now, let's go back to that, summer associate that's like going to apply to this law firm and wants to work at a job, and the partner that's taking interest in them in that moment is drinking like a really nice scotch, and they go, ooh, what kind of mocktails do you have? Could you imagine how that feels in that moment for that person? Even if they're a very confident, self-aware person, that's it just feels odd, and then so I think, saying like, hey, what kind of non-alcoholic cocktails do you have? Or let me see your list, and I would like this drink that's called the Ambassador or whatever the hell it's called, interesting drink. I'll take that. I think that is a different feeling. And so I do a lot of meetings and classes for people who want to implement non-alcoholic programs, whether it's for catering or bars, restaurants, hotels. And I tell them that there's like, it's not enough just to put a non-alcoholic cocktail on the menu, or even make a good one. You have to now place it in a way, I think that's, people can see it. You have to price it in a way and you have to train your staff to, when they interact with the guest, not to belittle them, right? So people say, I'll take this cocktail, and they say, that has no alcohol in it. And you go, well, no, of course I know it had. That's what I ordered from the menu. It says no, non-alcoholic, Right. So I think it's you have to go down the whole line to make sure that it's something that works. And then that's when you're really going to profit off of it, because people want it. It's out there. They need it. Dry January is a great example. Whoever was already had their program set up and were tending to people, their bars are full. For those people who kind of like lack, kind of like put it on haphazardly at the end, no surprise that your bars are, or restaurants are not as full.
Well, yeah. I mean, especially if you're a restaurant, bring them in, they're going to order the food, and then they're going to add this extra thing onto the menu. And it actually reminds me of a dinner experience that I had, comparing two dinner experiences. I was at one restaurant in Vegas, and 10 appetizers, and not a single one of them was gluten-free. So, and I think only three items out of the entire 50 things was gluten-free. And then I go to Greenville, South Carolina, and 9 out of the 10 appetizers were gluten-free. And my best friend is like, you don't know what to order, do you? And I'm like, no, I don't. And just think about me being able to add on that additional thing to my bill. I mean, yes, it's coming out of my pocket, but it's going to the restaurant bill, but it's also going to the server's pocket with a higher tip.
That's right. Yeah. Ultimately, it benefits everybody involved, right? This is not an opportunity to fleece people. This is an opportunity to create something that is beneficial for everybody, So the way I say it is that everyone's invited to sit at the bar. It's that simple. Yeah. And in doing so, I think that you're making people feel more welcome. You're making more money off of it. You are supporting a healthy culture. I mean, it's all, there's just nothing but wins.
Right. Joan had an interesting comment down here. She said, AA has huge meetings. Why not work with whoever manages their meetings to ensure they are aware?
This goes back to, I think, what we were talking about before, and it's a great idea, except I think that recovery is such a personal process, right? Everybody who identifies as an alcoholic, which we call alcohol use disorder, substance use disorder, they have their own path to recovery. Right. And for some people, it means that no alcohol at all. They can't be around it. It's going to trigger them. It's going to put them in a situation where their life changes rapidly and for the worse. And so there's other people, like you mentioned, the person who's in line who drinks and can have some of it and feels comfortable with it. And then there's other people who, like myself, who I identify as someone who has difficulty with drinking. I did have difficulty with drinking. So I put it aside for a while, and I can still drink non-alcoholic beers and wines and stuff, and I feel perfectly comfortable in that scenario. It's just such a personalized thing. So going to an AA meeting where there's like people with all this, it unfortunately, I think might put some people in jeopardy. So I try to stay away from that. I try to stay away from, making this about sobriety. Sometimes they call sober-ish, which I can understand, but it's not about sobriety.
Right. No, I like that. And it is everybody's personal path to whatever they're doing. I want to get back to when you were talking about the mindful definition too, and wanting to know what in your cocktails, what you're drinking. Because I think that goes also back to people wanting to know what's in their food. They really want to have this conversation about knowing what's in it. And I thought it was interesting looking at when I was at that store last week in Minneapolis, is that they're actually showing the ingredients and they're showing the calories on it and everything, which is not necessarily what liquor companies aren't required to do that. Right. And I really liked that about these non-alcoholic beverages.
That's right. Yeah, they're definitely showing more of what they're offering. They list the ingredients in it. Right. And sometimes those are just like natural flavors, and that can be confusing. But ultimately, you get more of a window into what you're drinking. And I think it's really important. Yeah, for food too. Obviously, I think that's the premise of what you do, and wonderful work, by the way. Right. Thank you for doing it, Tracy. But I think that definitely we should know what we're drinking, because people are more aware of their sensitivities. They're more aware of their allergies, and they're more aware of what's good for them. And I think that, or conversely, what doesn't work for them. So I think that, people should have more choices. Like ultimately, when I talk about mindful mixology and I talk about mindful drinking, it's also about offering a range of choices. So people can, I personally don't eat meat, but I have no problem with people eating meat. Obviously, I don't drink. I'm totally fine with people drinking. I think that's the culture I want to live in, where we all just sit next to each other and have a wonderful meal and drink, and we can all be there together.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because when I come around, people are like, "Oh, I'm eating meat," and I'm like, "Tracy's here. I'm eating meat." I'm like, "I eat meat. I don't care. It's not about what you eat or not eat. That's your choice, and I'm not here to judge you. I'm just here, like you, to make sure that everybody has a seat at the table with something or the bar with something that's not going to kill them, not going to offend them, and satiates them, right?
Satiates them, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, people just don't want to feel judged, and I get that. You hate it. I hate it. Everybody hates to feel judged. So I think that's fair. If somebody's being overly judgmental, that can be very mean and sometimes worse. But I think ultimately, by opening up the options, it's not about judgments. It's in fact about just bringing more people in.
Right, exactly. Joan has another, if you haven't noticed, she's quite engaged, which I love.
I love it.
Does safety come into the discussion of alcohol consumption? I'm going to say yes. I can throw out some stories, and I do like the idea of adding them to the airlines. So Delta Airlines, which I fly all the time, get some of these brands on the plane versus just having the club soda with a lime.
I mean, I'll say it, and maybe it'll sound a bit rude, but you're just plain ridiculous if you don't have a non-alcoholic selection on a plane, because people do want interesting things to drink, but alcohol in a lot of situations can be potentially problematic. I think I don't want to dance around that. I know that there are health issues. There's no amount of alcohol that's healthy, right? You can live a healthy lifestyle that incorporates alcohol. Right. So no problem there. Not everything we do is healthy. Ice cream is not healthy. That's okay. Eat ice cream sometimes. It's all right. Just don't eat it for breakfast every morning. That's bad for you. Right.
Or as Weight Watchers tells you not to have more than a half a cup. Like, who doesn't have more? Whatever.
I stopped buying pints because it was impossible for me to stop. I would go, I'm going to eat a quarter of this pint. I'm going to eat a half of this pint. I'm going to eat 3/4, and then it was done. And I was like, I literally just consumed a pint of ice cream. Anyway, that's my issue. That's not your issue out there in Radio Land. I'm sorry. I'm not telling you not to eat ice cream. For God's sakes, it's wonderful. And alcohol can be wonderful too. So all I'm suggesting is that, I don't want to dance around the fact that there are health issues with alcohol. And I think that's a wonderful point that she made, and definitely would encourage people, and airlines especially, to think about that when they're creating menus. How can you support people's vision of their own health?
And I think, well, gosh, it would help a lot of crazy people on airplanes sometimes, right? Here, by the way, have this one. Okay, so I want to bring up another chapter in here. Does that come out right? If we don't use alcohol, then what do we use? Right. And that was really kind of those ingredients that you were talking about earlier, like the aquafaba and even, are you using tinctures? Is that right?
Sure. Tinctures are usually associated with alcohol because their base of it is alcohol. But there are glycerin-based tinctures, right? So glycerin and water, you can capture, the same flavors in. So a great company out there is called All the Bitter by Ian and Carly Blessing. They are formerly worked at French Laundry, really great people. And they've created these non-alcoholic bitter that are, you could call compound tinctures, aromatic, orange, and New Orleans, which is like Peychaud's bitters. So there are really great tinctures out there that can be used, but some have alcohol and some are glycerin based. Now, an interesting thing about bitters in general and tinctures, sometimes you're just adding a couple drops to it. And so the actual definition of non-alcoholic is 0.5% alcohol or less. So in some of these cases, there is a small amount of alcohol. And so 0.5% is, just to be clear, you can find that much in a ripe banana or a piece of bread in some cases. So it's not that you're getting hammered on 0.5%. That's a very hard thing to do. But it does have, in some cases, have some. Now, so when it's defined as non-alcoholic, it means 0.5% or less. If it's alcohol-free, that means there's zero alcohol in it. Right.
That's a great distinction. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it's fair if you're adding a couple drops of something to say that, like if it's 5 to 8 ounces and you're adding 3 drops of something in it, well, that's going to be a trace amount. I mean, I would encourage a person to, especially if they're serving in a professional environment, to be concerned about what it might show up as in terms of the ABV, which is the alcohol by volume. But it's probably not an issue for most people. Now, I worked with Epicurious to create a alcohol by volume or ABV calculator that you can go on Epicurious and you can put in a cocktail, right? Because it's very confusing. Like if a Manhattan, for instance, has generally rye whiskey or bourbon in some cases, sweet vermouth and bitters, right? So a person be like, that's one drink, right? No, that's not. That's almost 3 drinks ultimately, and it's a very high ABV. So it depends obviously on how much, the serve is, but in some cases it can be a lot. So determining the alcohol by volume and then finding out the volume is useful if you're trying to figure out how much you're consuming. It can be very confusing. And I realize for some people, they're just like, blah, blah, blah. I have to do math to drink. No, thank you. Fair enough.
Right, exactly.
We made it easy for you. There's a calculator. Just type in the ingredients in the calculator and you can figure it out.
All right. And I just actually found that link and posted it in the chat. So I know that came up on Facebook and YouTube, but I'll add it to the other ones later. So the future of ABV spirits category, we've kind of talked about that. It's huge. I mean, it's gone from 30 to over 100 in the span of 3 years, right?
And non-alcoholic wines increased by 20%. Yeah. And
wow.
Athletic Brewing Company is listed as, I think, under the top 30 craft brewers in the United States.
Wow.
And guess what? That's all craft brewers with alcohol too. So there are, in fact, it's growing enormously.
Wow, that's huge. And I mean, just take advantage. I mean, if that market is growing, then it just makes sense that a hotel or a catering company adds these to their repertoire on their menus. Okay, I just based on an experience that I had last year, getting these into a hotel, how do they order them? Where does the food and beverage or the beverage director order them from their regular distributor, or do they order them from Sodexo or UNFI? How do they get them?
Yeah, this one's not easy. This is not an easy answer, unfortunately. Okay. There are some companies out there that are starting to distribute them nationwide. Okay. Some of those are kind of expensive. Okay. So right now, what I would encourage, and when I consult on, on and off premise hospitality and spirits and so forth, what I suggest is go through and try to find the least expensive. But the good news is that there are, in fact, lots of places that you can order them from right now. Okay. So what I would encourage people to do is to find the beverage they like. And the easiest way to do that right now probably is to go to one of these great non-alcoholic bottle shops or non-alcoholic bars that are starting to pop up and ask questions, or follow people like me who are constantly posting about, what we like and don't like. Find that bottle, go to that site and ask the person, where does this wholesale for? Some people do it directly. Some people do it through companies like Boisson, Boisson. Some people do it through conventional distributors like RNDC, Republic National. So it is a big bag. I hope that becomes easier over time for people. But the good news is that, again, you can order it with very little restrictions, so you don't have that 3-tier system in all cases.
And is it going through, is it regulated by tobacco, alcohol, or who's it regulated by?
FDA.
Is it FDA? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, and the non-alcoholic bottle shops, I mean, in my town of can I just go find them in a regular liquor store? And in North Carolina, we have ABC stores. So
the control, is that more of like a control state? Yeah. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
You could please get rid of those. Gosh, they're so terrible. I don't know what to do in those. In a lot of cases, those they might have some, but in some cases they say they can't have any non-alcoholic products in those. And so you might find them at your supermarket, like Whole Foods might have it,
That's 2 hours away.
Yeah. So it can be a little bit of a challenge. In that case, I might say go to, and I don't say this lightly because I don't like pushing people to this, but go to a website called Amazon.com, Amazon. And that's where you can find it. Like I don't want to put more money in a billionaire's pocket, but at the same time, it's super convenient. So I do it sometimes.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. And Julie Oster just laughed at that. But she also did say earlier in here, she's been on a healthy meal plan and lifestyle since September and was nervous about people commenting on what she was eating, feeling judged. And those thoughts have gone away because I'm doing this for me. That's great. And 100% agree. And it's even our friend and Julie, our friend, Kathy, who eats gluten-free. People are like, oh, what do you eat? What do you not eat? And I'm like, don't ask the questions. Just give me the food, right? Or give me the drink, right? Yeah.
Well, I think that's the point, right? We're in a culture, unfortunately, where you don't drink or you don't eat something and invite somebody to comment about who you are what your past is like, and in some cases, what your body is like. And so I really hope to get past that. I can really feel for that situation. And I hope that people out there listen and take this to heart, is that a person's personal decisions about what they eat and drink are their own damn business.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So I have 2 final questions for you. Since I just put your website up here, Positive Damage Incorporated, please tell us what you do under Positive Damage.
I don't know. I have no idea. I do this. I talk about like no and low alcohol cocktails and mindfulness.
Okay. And you just got a degree.
Yeah. I've got a number of certificates in wellness and positive psychology and that sort of thing, because I think that really feeds into everything. But I guess ultimately what I do is I teach people how to drink, and I teach bars, restaurants, hotels, liquor stores, how, which products that they can carry, how they can carry them, what's the best way to get them out there in the world. I'm sort of a Pied Piper for this stuff, no and low alcohol cocktails. And for me, it's about being out there and creating more choices for people. And so there's a lot of different things. In some cases, I might do special events. I might do talks about mindful drinking or no and low alcohol cocktails. And so I do a lot of different things. But I guess you could really, maybe I'm not selling myself well. One thing I don't do is I'm not a good salesperson. So let me just put it in 3 categories. I do consulting, classes, and content. Does that make it easier?
Okay. That makes it easier. Yep. Okay. And actually, you know what? Let's do a cocktail class. All right. So you and I can chat about that online, and I'll let everybody know about that. And Joan just commented in here. She's like, I'm a non-drinker and have been for years, just saying, you just say nothing. We don't have to say anything to what they say. Agree. Julie, thank you so much for saying that. Derek, the last question I have, and this is what I ask all of my guests, is what does a safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experience look like to you or feel like to you?
I mean, it gets down to the root word of hospitality. You know what I mean? It gets down to the root where it's really about 2 people at the heart of it, you and the other person. And so if you welcome somebody in your home, how would you treat them? And I think that that's the way I look at it when it's a bar, restaurant, hotel, whatever. How do I treat that person? And if that person is different from me, if they have different taste, customs, habits, things that they like, things that they don't like, I'm going to do my best to accommodate them. Now, I get it. If you have a specific theme, like a burger joint, sometimes it's hard to serve vegetarians too. And as much as I love gluten-free buns, I do realize that there's a mixed quality out there. So,
right.
So each person can make their choice on what their stand is and what they can and can't do. So I do sympathize for but if I'm welcoming somebody into my home, if I'm trying to care for somebody, I'm going to do everything within my power to make sure that they feel comfortable, happy, healthy. And so an inclusive environment has to start from that sort of mindset, from that attitude.
I love that. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you for joining us. You're welcome. We had a very lively discussion here. It was awesome. Thanks everybody. Joan, Julie, John, who else did I miss in here? Everybody that was on here. So Alex, appreciate it. Stay safe and eat well and drink well. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.